Next up, at this rate, harvest will be over before you know it, but a farmer's work is never over. There are several other tasks to complete post-harvest, and one important step for crop producers to take is weed management. Market Journal's Bill Dodd recently caught up with Nebraska Extension Weed Management Specialist Amit Jhala to find out more about Marestail management.
As the combines take their last pass through the field and the grain carts have finished filling the trucks, it's time for the work to continue. Many winter annual weeds can pose problems in the field come springtime. However, mare's tail can be an especially troublesome weed for many producers to control. Scouting should be done in the fall as well as early spring in order to formulate an effective management strategy.
Marestail is a broadleaf winter as well as summer annual weed species, and the leaves are small, alternate, and one typical character of Marestail is it can form a rosette in the fall that can overwinter. So this is a typical character of Marestail compared with any other winter annual weed species.
Mare's tail usually exhibits rapid growth and is aggressively competitive with other crops for water. Amit warns that failure to properly suppress the weed could result in devastating yield loss.
It is a very competitive weed and it can grow large, up to 1 meter tall, even in presence of crop species like particularly soybean. It is very competitive, and it can cause yield reduction in the range of 50 to 75% if it is not controlled. So when Marestail is relatively small, like less than 1.5 inch or 2 inch tall, that is the best way herbicides will be more effective compared with, as I told you, if they can overwinter in rosette form, and once they grow, emerge in early spring, then they can grow really tall and it will be more difficult to control when you will try with some post-emergence herbicides after planting crops. So the best way is to control them in the fall, and with some reason if growers are not able to control them in the fall, then the alternate strategy will be just to try something early spring.
Mare's tail can be particularly challenging to round up because this plant can produce up to 200,000 seeds, of which about 80% can germinate immediately after being expelled from a mature plant. To make matters even worse, this plant is the first glyphosate-resistant weed reported in the United States.
Marestail is difficult to control because it has evolved resistant to glyphosate as well as some ALS inhibiting herbicides. So majority of Marestail in Nebraska, I would consider them as a glyphosate resistant, and that's why we have to use some alternate herbicide programs. For example, in the fall, growers can consider using herbicides that contain either 2,4-D or dicamba, or maybe paraquat if weather conditions are better. So there are three dicamba products that were labeled in soybean. They cannot be used now because of the cancellation of their registration, and that includes Hexapan, Engenia, and Extendimax. But you can use some other available dicamba formulations for controlling Marestail in the fall. So growers have to use some alternate herbicides other than glyphosate because majority of them are glyphosate resistant.
While herbicide options may be limited, there are still some alternatives. While it's not typically recommended to implement residual herbicides in the fall, as it happens, many producers in the state are ahead of schedule on harvest, and this could be an advantageous time to utilize these applications if the target happens to be mare's tail.
Generally, we do not recommend to apply residual herbicides in the fall because we cannot take much advantage of residual activity, especially when harvest is late and then emergence of Marestail is late. But if harvesting was done early and if you see lot of Marestail is coming up in the field, then there is a value to use some residual herbicides, for example sulfentrazone or flumioxazine based herbicides like herbicide active ingredients in Authority or Valor or Fierce type of herbicides can be applied in the fall, but only when Marestail infestation is very high. Otherwise, I would keep those residual products to be applied in early spring so growers can take advantage of their residual activity late in the summer.
It seems that the no-till crop production systems adopted over the last couple of decades have bolstered the propagation of mare's tail. Given the plant's stubborn nature, Amit suggests an integrated approach be taken under consideration.
See, if growers are considering to control Marestail in the fall, then they can consider some other practices. For example, tillage can also help. Some of the studies we conducted at UNL says if you can just till the soil in top 10 centimeter area, like about 2.5 inch deep tillage can also reduce significant Marestail emergence in early spring. So tillage is one of the practices, and cover crops can also help to suppress Marestail emergence in the fall as well as in the early spring. So integrated approach has to be considered when you control Marestail, and especially in non-crop areas, you will have more options for controlling Marestail because there is no crop, and that will increase your herbicide options. But when you have a corn or soybean or any other crop, then you have to consider Marestail control practices either in the fall or in the early spring before you go for planting your crops.
Once the last load has been hauled in, it's time to get back in the field and make sure problems like mare's tail don't sneak up on you come spring. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.